joining us. Okay, joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, a conversation with Congresswoman Chellie Pingree. Congresswoman Chellie Pingree represents Maine's 1st Congressional District, where she sits on the House Agriculture Committee and the powerful House Appropriations Committee, chairing the subcommittee on Interior and the Environment. She lives on North Haven and is a longtime climate and clean energy champion with a perfect 100% score on the 2020 League of Conservation Voters National Environmental Scorecard, which of course we care a lot about and use that as a benchmark. So congratulations, Congresswoman Pingree, on your score. We are thrilled to have you with us today. My name is Maureen Druin, and I am the Executive Director of Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 8,500 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. MCA does that through education, collaboration, and advocacy, and MCV does that by influencing public policy, holding elected officials accountable, and winning elections. Just a few technical notes for today's event. Congresswoman Pingree will start us off with some remarks, but since this really is a conversation, we'll use the bulk of our time together for your questions. You are all muted, but we do want to hear from you. Please send your questions to Will Sedlak through the chat as they occur to you. He and I will keep track of your questions to ask during the question and answer session at the end. And you can also message Will directly if you have any technical difficulties. This event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, along with the recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Thank you all again for joining us, and especially to our guests, Congresswoman Chellie Pingree. Congresswoman, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maureen. Thank you to everybody who's with us today. I really appreciate you taking your time to chat with me, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions, your thoughts, suggestions, ideas, a little bit of a dialogue about where we are and where we're going. But I do appreciate Maine League of Conservation Voters, the National LCV. I'm proud to have a 100% score, but I really appreciate the role that you play in keeping environmental issues in the forefront, whether it's during the political season or the legislative season or congressional season. We know how critically important this is, and particularly now more than ever. So I'm very grateful for your partnership on this issue, these issues, and really we'll look forward to working with you in the future. So I'll just do a little bit of an overview, and then we can get to questions. So I don't spend too much time talking about things you're not interested in, and I try to answer the things that you want to know more about. I guess I'd have to start by saying, in spite of the challenges that we have been facing this year, particularly the assault on our democracy, whether it was January 6th or the continuing assault on our election laws and trying to interfere with people's right to vote and the importance of voting in our democratic process. So setting that aside and some of the challenges that we've been through this year, I can't say enough what a huge change it is in Washington to have a new president and a new administration. There's no one on this call that I have to tell you that it was a very hard 4 years. You know, in so many ways, whether it was having a leader of our country who was pitting people against each other, or an administration that couldn't handle this horrendous pandemic in the way that it should have been done, or with a little bit of a focus on the issues that many of us care about and we're here to talk about today, dealing with an administration that really had disregard for science, for facts, for data, for information, and completely refused to talk about climate change and the importance of putting this issue in the forefront. So that did a lot of damage over the last 4 years. And I am grateful every morning to wake up and say, you know, at least we didn't get another 4 years of that, because I can't imagine how much more damage that would have done, and also how little progress we would have made in putting our pandemic to bed. And so I know we're not at the end of this, but I'm grateful for the amazing progress that we've made, and just the ability to work with a group of people who, really believe in making sure that we have the treatment and the care and the vaccine and all those things out there, so we truly can move ahead. But also, as we look at tackle the bigger range of issues, whether it's economic issues or health issues, environmental issues, across the board, we get the opportunity as members of Congress to deal with administration that has made appointments. Whether you disagree or agree with every single opinion that they have, they are people who believe in government, who are there because they care about working in the agency that they're chosen to lead or assist in the leading of. And many of them have a lot of experience and are certainly grounded in science and data and fact. And it just makes our job so different. So for all of you who care about elections and who have worked hard to make sure we had some substantial changes this year, please know that it makes a difference. And even though our majorities are so tight, and that brings a whole nother set of challenges in the Senate with literally one vote, and in the House with only a handful of votes, it makes it hard to move forward on agenda. But the difference, particularly in Washington, of being in the majority, where the majority really has absolute rule about what bills come to the floor, about what committees take up, about who chairs those committees, it just makes a huge difference in the amount of work that we're able to do. And I, for one, am particularly grateful that I have the opportunity to chair the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. I've served on this committee for a while. I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and in Washington, slightly different than the way we do it in Maine. We're divided up into 12 or 13 subcommittees, and each one really focuses on the work of that section of the appropriations bill. So I serve on the Agriculture Appropriations Bill, which is one I've been really pleased to be a part of, the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, and also military, construction, and the VA. But because I'm able to chair the Interior Appropriations Committee, for me, that brings about a whole new set of responsibilities, but also opportunities to really be a part of that agenda and move forward on many of the things that we care about. And particularly, again, to be doing this at a moment in time where we have an entirely new administration to work with, having spent the last 4 years constantly fighting on assaults to the things we care about, whether it was an administration that tried to get rid of the Endangered Species Act or all clean air and clean water protections, scrub every website of every word related to climate change, throw away a lot of important data that we need to pursue what's going on. It's just a world of difference to actually work with an administrator at the EPA who has experience in state matters. And of course, my good friend, Deb Haaland. It's an important moment in time to have somebody who can lead the Department of Interior, who not only is a Native American and who can help us deal with many of the challenges that our country has had, not meeting our tribal obligations, but also is a hardcore environmentalist, cares about climate change, and I know will lead this department in a completely different direction. So while it's almost impossible to fix everything overnight, and we're just working as hard and as fast as we can to get as much done literally in our first 2 years, knowing that majorities can slip away quickly. And once that happens, everything that we want to do becomes that much more difficult. We're just hoping that we can do a lot. From the perspective of the Appropriations Committee, we are currently working on our markup of the appropriations bill. And because we had a new administration and actually only received their fully formed budget last Friday, we have a lot of work to do very quickly. And I can say again, just as a new committee chair, there's a big learning curve to understand every single issue, every rider, every line item. And we have to have all these bills done by the end of July. So we'll literally start marking them up, which is kind of the final process at the end of this month in June. So it's going to be a very busy time, and we're going to do as much as we can. The good news is the president has allocated big increases into our section of the budget. It's up, I think, at least between 15 and 20%. So that means we're going to have a lot of opportunities to get funding back into the Environmental Protection Agency, which has been decimated both in staff and in programs and in authority to oversee the things that we care about. But also to work on issues related to our public lands, our forestry, program for the Forest Services funded under the Department of Interior subcommittee budget. So we're very excited about the work that we get to do. Also at the agriculture side, and I can get into more details about this, but many of you know, I wrote a bill around agriculture and climate change, and I'm happy to go through all the details of that. But we're grateful that we have an administration that has made agriculture and climate change an important tenet of what they're working on, and really sees the role that agriculture can play in being a good environmental partner in climate change and the things that we can be doing to sequester more carbon in the soil, and also in the important role our forests play. So I feel like I have the right piece of legislation at the right time. It's much of it has been included in our Democratic climate plan that we worked on last year. And I'm looking forward to moving forward on that. So I think I should stop there because, you know, I could just kind of keep talking on, and I want to make sure I touch on the issues that you care most about. And I can talk more about some of those things in your question and answer.
Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman. And I think we're going to do something interactive right now before we jump into the conversation. If we're going to take a screenshot with the Congresswoman. So those of you who feel comfortable, if you could take yourselves off or put yourselves on camera, and I'm going to wait a minute for people to take themselves off camera. And then we're all gonna wave and take a screenshot, and I'll say 1, 2, 3. So I'll give you a little more time. Oh, I'm seeing people come in. I'm just wondering if I could do what I can. I don't know if everyone.
Right, if you could have them hold for a second, there's a couple pages, so I'll have to do a couple of screenshots.
Okay, great. So I'll do 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do one, and then 1, 2, 3, and we'll do another one, and 1, 2, 3, we'll do another one. So you can like thumbs up or wave or smile on the count of 3. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, and ready? 1, 2, 3. And one more time. 1, 2, 3. All right, great. So I feel like we're simulating when we visit you in Washington, D.C., when the photographer comes in sometimes and takes pictures, like the Zoom version of that. So thank you so much. And thank you to all the participants for doing that. That'll be fun. Now, Congresswoman, you've worked for decades to conserve Maine's lands and waters. I remember when you were in the Maine Senate and led the effort to pass the $50 million bond for the Land for Maine's Future program. You fought to protect access to Maine's working waterfronts. Over the last decade, you've worked to designate the York River as wild and scenic. You talked a little bit about your position, what your position is like chairing the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. So for CD1, what are some of the priorities you're most excited about using your position to advance?
Well, I have to say overall, for the good of our country and making sure we're well prepared to deal with climate change, making sure that the Environmental Protection Agency is returned to fully staffed, a rigorous budget, just the ability to both enforce our environmental laws, but also to be real partners in climate change. I think that's critically important. And as many of you know, the EPA funds a lot of the state positions at the DEP. So having full funding there is a critically important part of how we're able to manage the work that we have in Maine, much of it that is better managed from the state of Maine directly. So I would say the EPA is very important. The role that the Biden administration is willing to play in our public lands, 30 by 30, the idea that we're going to preserve and protect more of our public lands, and the understanding of this administration, the important role they play in mitigating the impact of climate change, in a whole variety of areas, and then also dealing with some of the activities that have gone on public lands related to mining, how forestry is practiced on public land. There's much to do there. Grazing. Frankly, it's a steep learning curve for me because, as you know, Maine doesn't have a lot of federal land, but you get to the western part of our country and massive amounts of the land are held by the federal government, which is important and an important resource. Our national parks also come under this role, and dealing with the maintenance backlog, helping our parks to deal with the effects of climate change. They've become such an important resource during the pandemic. Everyone wants to be outside, and you know, that's a really wonderful silver lining, if there can be a silver lining to a horrible pandemic. But I think we need to encourage that and continue to support it, and also support the numbers of visitors that are coming to our national parks. They need a lot more resources to deal with everything from traffic to beach erosion to everything else you can imagine. I'm also really excited coming from the state of Maine to be able to have a close relationship with the United States Forest Service. Again, it's a very different role in the Western states, but I think practicing sustainable forestry is really important all over our country. Particularly given the important role we know trees play in sequestering carbon during our climate change challenges. But also here in Maine, where we're the most forested state in the nation. Almost 90% of the state is forested. And we've had such a huge transition in our forest products industry, really seeing the closure of paper mills and some of the traditional industries, but also seeing some amazing innovations coming into our state. The wood, the facility is going to be producing wood fiber based home insulation. And just a reminder, many of you know this, but when we use wood in construction, whether it's a public building, you know, a massive structure or a home, the carbon that is sequestered in that tree also becomes stored in the carbon of the home. So if you think about replacing steel and concrete with wood in construction, it has huge opportunities for us. And it also allows for some economic opportunities to our state to be working in a forest products industry that's producing materials that are good for our climate. We're also, you know, possibly going to site a cross-laminate timber facility, which would be another great important building material. There's a facility going up in East Millinocket, or proposed, that will do biochar. Biochar is an important additive for the soil that can help us to sequester more carbon. And again, you know, coupling all that with sustainable forestry practices, and also doing our best to take good care of our forests so that we reduce the forest fire danger, because particularly, again, when you get to the West Coast, if you don't manage a forest well, A, you won't sequester enough carbon, and B, you set yourself up for some of the horrendous forest fires where we've been facing, which obviously spew carbon into the atmosphere and put us in the opposite direction. So that's more geeky than you wanted to know about forestry, but the forest, particularly the funds that get spent on innovation, wood innovation grants, so the research that the Forest Service does, it's really important both in establishing our sustainable forest practices, so that using wood means that we're also using it from sustainable forests, but also innovating those products that will help us replace building materials that aren't as good for our environment, and also could be a net benefit for the state of Maine. Okay, so I've probably given you more than you wanted to know, and I'm sure there's other things I'm leaving out. Oh, okay, most importantly, I should also mention, we have oversight of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So I already mentioned that it's just, it's an important time in our country to have Deb Haaland as a Secretary of Interior, as a member of a federally recognized tribe, but also with hundreds of federally recognized tribes all over the country, and a country that's got a long history of not meeting our treaty obligations, racism towards our Native people, you know, lots of history to correct, lots of underfunding whether it comes to health or school or infrastructure in tribal communities, and then some of the special complications that we have in Maine because of the settlement here. It's an enormous amount to tackle, but I just feel so grateful to be able to work with this administration at this moment in time, when I hope we can correct some wrongs and work towards the important things we should be doing. So that's a long list, but it's a great place to be.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. And thank you for talking about the important role that means forests play in sequestering carbon, and also you know, providing jobs for our state. I know another issue that's pretty close to your heart are the oceans. I saw you on social media visiting the piping plovers down at Popham recently. That looked like a really fun trip. Your conservation efforts have also included restoring protections for the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts National Monument. Can you share why you think protecting this place is so important?
Sure. Well, we know that the Obama administration moved forward on those protections, and I think that we were all pleased to see protections being extended to important resources in our ocean, particularly places that are often the breeding ground of important species that are critically important as we move forward and better understand the role that the oceans play, both in terms of having enough fish in the seas, biodiversity in the sea, but also the oceans are charged now with removing, again, a lot of carbon from the atmosphere and struggling because of it. So we were glad to see the Obama administration move forward. As you all probably remember, we had to suffer through a visit from the previous president to our own city of Bangor, removing those protections as a perceived gift to the fishermen, which didn't even really apply to Maine fishermen because it's not a territory that they work in. But anyway, it's under review by the Biden administration. So I have an expectation that they will go back into protecting it. They made a declaration in March that they would review it. That was meant to come up in 60 days. We haven't seen it yet, but I know it's also coupled with Bears Ears and Escalante in Utah, and the Utah delegation is getting the secretary to visit. Anyway, that's sort of the inside politics of it. So we're waiting for that visit to happen before they start to release some of their decisions. So again, we will be hoping to see that it is protected again, and also interested to see if they don't, what their argument is.
Great. So you talked about the forest's role and the ocean's role in tackling climate change. Just moving a little bit to something that's been in the press lately is the proposal for an offshore wind array in federal waters by the state of Maine. So that proposal this past year has brought renewed interest in offshore wind as a clean energy solution. You're both a climate champion and a resident of an island community. What future do you envision for offshore wind in Maine? And what excites you about this opportunity?
Well, look, I'm not, I certainly understand the concerns that have been raised by many of the fishermen, and I, from their perspective, the challenges that our fisheries are facing, particularly the lobster fishery, is coming on a variety of levels. We have huge questions to resolve about protecting the right whale, which is critically important, but also doing it in a way that works well. The ocean is warming at a rate faster than any other ocean. Virtually, the Gulf of Maine is warming at a rate faster than any other ocean in the world. We have more severe storms coming all the time. So there are many, many challenges. And I think for many of the fishermen, they just feel like they're not really sure where to turn on any given day to make sure that they can protect their livelihood, the important cultural history of this fisheries. Living in a community as I do, North Haven, Vinyl Haven, Stonington, these are the capitals of lobster harvest in the world. So it's just so critically important. And I really do understand and sympathize with all the questions that they have been raising. Part of the point of doing the research that is proposed by the University of Maine at the site it's at is to get that kind of research to understand how it would work, what kind of impact it would have on the fisheries, what are the unintended consequences, plenty of questions that should be asked. In the bigger picture, as you know, the Biden administration has proposed an enormous emphasis on offshore wind, particularly in federal waters. And, Maine will be considered as part of that. Leases will be considered as part of that. The governor's currently got a moratorium on state waters, so this will certainly come up for consideration. And in Maine, I think one of the questions is this, there's very likely that this administration will lease some of the federal waters off of Maine. But will it be, a Maine-based project, or will it be another entity that, chooses what to do and deals only with the federal government? So these are always going to be hard trade-offs. And I don't think that, I think that all of us have to remind ourselves every day that moving into an era where we take climate change seriously, where we make substantial changes to our economy, to our livelihoods, to our daily lives, each one will come with a check question about balancing out, the pluses and minuses. If we cite solar arrays on agricultural land, have we given up important agricultural land that could be sequestering carbon or growing crops locally? Each one is a decision that we have to make, and we have to look, for a lot of public input and a lot of decision making that takes all the facts and says, what's the best way to move forward? But I think we all know that we're we're way behind in moving out of a fossil fuel based energy system and economy. And we don't have a lot of time to waste. So while some of these decisions we could put off to another generation, if we don't make some of these tough decisions now, which will inevitably, upset some people and not others, we won't have a planet to give to our grandchildren. And I think that's just going to be hard. So I don't think anybody, can say or should think that, well, there's a great solution, just get it over with, do it. There are multiple challenges that we have to deal with, and each one comes with a cost, and we have to make sure that we don't leave people behind and communities behind, and consider environmental justice as we're doing all this. So it's going to be tough everywhere we do it, and it's going to be just as tough with these decisions in Maine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your thoughtful response on a tricky issue. Just sticking with climate change a little bit more, Maine conservation voters and a lot of the folks on this call worked alongside hundreds of state and local officials and advocates and citizens to develop the state's new climate action plan. Maine won't wait. We've collectively started to implement that plan through executive orders from Governor Mills, action by the legislature and state agencies, and leadership from people and communities across the state. How do you see the federal government, and what is the role of the federal government in connecting to and supporting the implementation of Maine's climate action plan?
Well, first off, to everybody who worked on that plan, thank you for your work. It had such a wonderful cross section of people from Maine and people who really dug in and dealt with some of the tricky issues. And I think for Maine to be one of the early states to have a roadmap about how to move forward will serve us extremely well. So there are great benefits for our state, but I think there will also be great benefits for our state in enabling us to move forward, because we're in a better position to attempt to access some of those federal funds, but also to help influence what we think is best to be doing and what will be good for Maine. So it's a detailed list, but I think that many of the things in the President's proposed infrastructure plan are done through a climate change lens. An important part of that is helping us to make the conversion to electric cars. And such a big part of that is the infrastructure to handle it. Dealing with charging stations, also a real emphasis on public transportation, trains, buses, everything that we can do to reduce the number of cars on the road, and everything we can do to think about alternative transportation, but still, particularly in a rural state like ours, since we're very much based on getting around in individual vehicles, I think helping people make that transition, making electric cars more affordable, just everything that needs to be done could help push us faster. And as you know, many of the companies themselves, the car companies, have already decided that they will be, moving forward quickly. And pretty soon people will be driving Ford F-150s that are, more powerful because they're electric than they were when they were gas. And that's going to be great. Also, other energy partnerships, investing in solar, helping the homeowner to invest, both in making their, we lose a lot of energy from, badly insulated homes, not enough, not double pane windows in commercial buildings, all those things. And I think there's a big push on that. Many of the things I've been talking about related to agriculture, huge investments in states that want to work on soil health and want to support farmers and doing more conservation, soil health, investing in our oceans. That I think will be a big part of it. And I've worked alongside my colleagues in a variety of ways, making suggestions of things that weren't in the infrastructure bill. So as we negotiate it, even more things that help, for instance, with the health of our forests, the health of our farms. It's just such a long list. I can't even remember what else I'm not thinking about, but I just think we're going to be in a good position to benefit from this and take advantage of it.
That's great. And we've already seen how the Mills administration and the implementation of the Climate Action Plan has benefited from the American Rescue Plan Act. We're really excited about the American Jobs Plan and some of the priorities you laid out, making critical investments in our environment, public health, the economy, creating millions of good jobs. We know from polling that the American Jobs Plan has broad support from the public across all political parties. I don't know if you read former President Barack Obama's book. I'm sure you were in Congress with, while he was president. How much time should the Biden administration spend on coming up with a bipartisan agreement? I know they're working really hard on that. We'd all really love to see that, but it's tricky. So what is your perspective on that piece around, how long do you put off this, action on the American Jobs Plan to see if we can come to some sort of agreement?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very tricky question, and one that in many ways is in the president's lap, because he has to get sort of a sense of how fast he can move and what he can do. But I think his deadline is Monday. So I think we're reaching the end of a negotiation. And I think it has been important for him to negotiate in good faith. I know we all cringe anytime we hear any change or giving up anything, whether it's around tax policy or environmental policy or the broad range of infrastructure that he's categorized as important infrastructure in our country, that the other side really wants to slim down into just traditional roads and bridges kind of infrastructure. So I think it's been an important public dialogue, as well as just important for him to attempt to do those negotiations in good faith. And I believe, as a longtime member of the Senate, he really understands both how to do that and why it's important. But at some point, look, I think we're all, let's say on my side, we see the urgency of this. We know the limited amount of time that we have available. We're anxious to move forward on, an opportunity, assuming we can, to do another package under reconciliation, which is the process we used before, which is actually kind of a lengthy process. It requires a lot of analysis from the parliamentarian for a whole variety of reasons. So it takes a while no matter what we do. So, some of us are ready to roll because we want to see a broader package. But if the president were able to negotiate a somewhat smaller conventional package with the Republicans, so we did have a bipartisan bill that could move through, and then we put the things that we couldn't agree on in a separate package, there's an opportunity to do that too. But the problem will be, and that's sort of where it is right now, if there's so little agreement with the other side that he's not able to put any pay-fors in there, so it's a big unfunded package. And if a lot of the things that people really care about can't be included or done, or if they're done in ways we don't like. So, we'd all like to see it happen quickly. But again, we're in a wonderful position, and we need to be in the majority. We need to be in the majority in the House and Senate. And as I said before, it's great to have a majority, even if it's only one vote. But I think we all know, those one or two votes are tricky ones in the Senate, and even our margin in the House is a little tricky. So I think that the president also has to do a lot of due diligence for some of the members of his own party who are reluctant to pass a big, non-bipartisan bill. But going back to your first point, that's the important one to remember. This has huge bipartisan approval across our country. And as people often say, what most Americans who are concerned with the process will say, did you get it done? Not, how many votes did you get from both sides? And that's how it was in the pandemic bills. People wanted to see it get done. They wanted to see the economy supported, our schools supported. And that's exactly what they'll say about the critical items in the infrastructure bill. They'll say, are you working towards climate change? Are you creating new jobs? Are you getting broadband to my community? And how soon can you make it happen?
Great, thank you. And, I could keep talking with you all day myself, but I also want to respect that our participants have some questions for you too. I think we covered some of them in this initial conversation, but this is a really good time to transition to our call to action, which we do before the question and answer section. And the first is letting people know how they can keep in touch. And I'll just say that we'll be sending out a follow-up email to everybody on this call, everybody who registered, with links. But the calls to action this week is to know how they can keep in touch with you, Congresswoman Pingree. The Congresswoman shares updates and information through her newsletter and has a great social media presence, including the pictures with the piping plovers at Popham Beach recently. All good ways Maine people can stay in touch. The second call to action is regarding what we were just talking about, the American Jobs Plan, and asking Maine Senators Susan Collins and Angus King to support the American Jobs Plan. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make critical investments in our environment, public health, and economy, rebuild our country's infrastructure, and create millions of good jobs. So we'll be sending you a follow-up email later this afternoon with a recording to today's event, a link to sign up for Congresswoman Pingree's newsletter, and details to help you urge our senators to support the American Jobs Plan. All right, now let's ask some more questions. I want to take one that is something that isn't exactly on the environment, but I know is very important to the underpinning of American society, and that's around democracy. And I know you worked for a while at Common Cause, really on voting rights and democracy. And we saw a number of attempts in 2020 and also in 2021 to weaken our democracy, disenfranchise voters, including the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. As a co-sponsor of H.R. 1, the For the People Act, can you speak to the role you see for the federal government in ensuring that elections around the country remain accessible for all eligible voters? And then just sort of this is a tack-on question, I hope you don't mind, but why is DC statehood and filibuster reform an important piece of democracy reform to you?
Sure. Well, I think HR 1 just gets to those fundamental things that are critically important in our democracy. And, number one is everybody's ability to vote, and making it possible for people to vote in a way that's accessible. There are countries around the world who make Election Day a holiday. There are countries around the world that make voting mandatory. While we're not ready to go that far, there is just something critically important about when every voter's vote is cast. You get a sense of what the American people truly want, not who came to the polls, not who was able to come to the polls, not who didn't get cut off the list, not who wasn't allowed to have a drink of water from an outside person while they were standing in line for 3 hours. I think we've taken a lot of that for granted. Maine has been a wonderful state with, very reasonable voting provisions, same-day registration, the kinds of things that just seem like, sort of no-brainers. Like, why should you have to think 2 months in advance about whether you're registered or not? Especially if you're a first-time voter, or you just moved to the area, you don't know what the rules are. You show up on election day and they're like, oh, sorry, your name's not on the list. Or we took your name off the list because you didn't vote for 2 elections. Well, maybe your grandmother was sick. It shouldn't be these crazy things that we now hear about. So we have taken it for granted in a sense, but now we're watching exactly what kind of damage can be done. And again, it's horrific to watch the bills that are being proposed in state legislature that are being jammed through, the fake audits, all these things to undermine people's confidence in the election, in an election that was, it was well monitored, it was well held, it was certified by the Congress, just barely, because, people tried to stop that too. So it's just really important. And the ability to have a federal provision that protects a lot of these things that we can decide are fundamental, and we make those federal decisions often in this country to say, here's how we protect people's civil rights. Here's how voting rights is going to work in our country. And then states can work within those. But, I'm pretty sure I don't have to sell anybody here, but the challenge is we have to get that done. And, there's talk in the Senate about perhaps moving some voting right provisions in such a way that the filibuster is exempted, or a variety of things that only senators, have the right to change the rules. And, every day is a mystery over there. But, I think there's a clear understanding. And in a sense, the worse the actions are in states around the country, the more likely we are to see a federal bill move through. And one other thing I would remind people on the democracy side, some of these things come up now because of the Supreme Court's decision to remove pre-clearance. And I didn't used to really understand the importance of pre-clearance, but that meant for a state that's had, a history of voting right violations, they had to go to get pre-cleared before they made these kind of changes. They couldn't just arbitrarily do it in their legislature. And that was a recent decision in the Supreme Court, within the last decade. And now we can see the damage that's done, and that many of these states, they weren't ready to move into making fair decisions that matter to the whole country. And again, there are states' rights, and you could say, let them decide, but federal elections impact all of us. The balance of power impacts all of us. And when you can see such egregious suggestions, we have to fix it. So that's a really important provision in there, and something that I think we have a lot of agreement that we should pass. DC statehood, I've been a supporter of that since I worked at Common Cause in the early 2000s. And, there's just no reason for 700,000 people in this country to be, disenfranchised, don't have the right to vote. And so period. We've made a lot of these decisions before. I'm not a great, I can't remember all the historic decisions, but there have been other times when, for instance, North Dakota and South Dakota got to become 2 states because that gave them 4 senators. And, so these things happen in a slightly partisan way or to advantage one side or the other over time. And, the argument is that there are too many Democrats in DC, and that's why, Republicans don't want to make this happen, but, in a good government side or with some other kind of agreement that makes it seem fair, we should certainly do that. And the filibuster, most historians will tell us that was part of Jim Crow. It was a way to, take away people's civil rights when it was first made a rule. It's not in the Constitution, and the Senate can change it. And I understand the need for a bipartisan argument to go on, but given that it's so simplified now, you don't have to stay up all night and, read out of a book. It's not Mr. Smith Goes to Washington anymore. It's just a little procedural rule that allows the majority basically to say no to everything. And frankly, the minority to say no to everything. And again, we could have lived with this rule probably if, in my opinion, Mitch McConnell hadn't been abusing it for so long. And when you have a leader that doesn't act like some of our previous leaders did, who really saw the importance of bipartisanship, and you hear these great historic stories about people who worked well across the, both sides of the aisle, and leaders who did that well. Well, that has not been the Senate in the last few years, and I think it's going to force them to change the rules when they can get enough Democrats to agree with that.
Great, thank you. This question is from a city councilor who asks, what sorts of environmental issues could you see or recommend as being suitable for regional cooperation efforts? And are there, or would you support federal grants to assist local municipalities in undertaking such measures?
Absolutely. And I think municipalities have played an important role in, when we had 4 years of administration that was unwilling to support climate change. You saw a lot of municipalities and states around the country who really, stuck with a climate change process and promise, and have continued to do so. So, climate change and sustainability plans can be done at a state and regional level. And I, coming from Maine, I really see the importance of that. Some of our early rescue plans and our early packages to deal with the pandemic only gave money to the states. And I was one of the strong supporters of making sure that communities also had access to that funding. And as you know, in the American Rescue Plan, municipalities in Maine, even down to the tiniest ones, either have or will be receiving funds to deal with their unique challenges. And I think we should look at climate change in exactly the same way. And you can really see, particularly in Maine, where we have a lot of coastal communities, and with sea level rise and more severe storms, we're really seeing erosion happening quickly. And for the bigger cities, a place like Portland that really has huge issues with stormwater drainage and flooding and, all kinds of consequences, as well as tiny municipalities that have to plan and think about what to do in the future, whether, we have to move buildings or put a different kind of public pier there, or all the questions that have to be asked. Grants like coastal zone management and funding those kinds of planning processes are really, really important because, you know, we all have to be thinking now about how to deal with a process that's very hard to slow down at this point.
Great, thank you. And there was a related question about Islesboro that someone wrote. Islesboro will eventually be separated into 2 islands by sea level rise. And if you do have anything to add that you haven't already said, any insight into what support communities might apply for to mitigate the impact of sea level rise in particular?
Well, just again, I think that some of the planning grants are out there. Some of the resources that are there, which I hope we can increase, will be really important for those communities because it's a big planning process to think about, you know, what does it take to deal with changes like that? You know, what if a big bridge has to be constructed in a community? What if there are buildings all along the waterfront that are critically important? I'll just tell you this totally anecdotal story, but we're looking at funding in this bill to help move some of the tribal communities, particularly in some of the western states and Alaska in particular. There are multiple tribes that have depended on living right on the coast, and that's an important part of their livelihood, but also the community is built there. And so there are multiple tribes that already need to be moved, and because we have a tribal obligation or a treaty obligation, and we're looking at starting to put some funding into that. And we heard one estimate that it costs about $1 million per person to move a community out of harm's way, because it's not just, you know, it's not just each individual house, it's the school, the health center, the roads, the bridges, the electricity. And so even in the tiniest of communities, these are massive expenses. And, you know, at least in that one, the government has to pony up a share, the federal government, but you talk about a lot of municipalities that are going to face this. You know, the sooner plans start so that, you know, the federal money that is available can be looked at, or again, it becomes part of our federal planning process. And look, this, you know, just as an aside, you know, it makes me sick to my stomach that we have to think about how we're going to, you know, mitigate the impacts of climate change because we've had so many years of being unwilling to stop the process to separate ourselves from fossil fuels. So the money that it is going to cost down the road is it's unfathomable. And, you know, the quicker we decide to deal with this, the less that will be. But, you know, between the severity of storms and sea level rise, we're already well into this process of things going in the wrong direction.
Thank you. And it just reminds me how grateful we are to have you in Congress representing Maine. So thank you again for being at the forefront.
You're so nice. Thank you.
There is a question here about agriculture, and this isn't the question, but is it true that you started farming as a teenager?
That is true. I came to Maine because I was a back to the lander, and I like to tell people the first book I read was, you know, Living the Good Life, Living Simply by Helen and Scott Nearing. So, yep, no, that's where I got it. And I tried living as a back to the lander for a couple of years, and then I ended up at College of the Atlantic, and I'm eternally grateful that I actually got an education in both how to raise plants and how to, you know, deal with environmental issues. So, and I still have a certified organic farm today. So it's an important part of my ability to stay connected to the realities of, you know, what it's like to run a farm and also real environmental processes that we have to deal with. So, yep, that's how I got here.
Great. Well, so the question is from someone who is the manager of food and nature at World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Just to thank you from this person, and given your multiple committee roles in the House and your interest in food and agriculture, both professionally and personally, could you please provide perspective on where the Biden administration and Congress will likely go this year, specifically on climate smart agriculture and financing a transition to a climate smart future? And how can Maine benefit in these efforts in our food and agriculture sector?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and it could have been, you know, sort of the discussion for the whole call. You know, one thing, just to put it in perspective in general, many of us have had huge concerns about our food system overall, whether it's on the environmental side and the damage that conventional agriculture can do to our environment, water runoff, other kinds of pollution, air issues, it's massive. Also the health and, quality of farming and the kind of food that we eat. But I think one, important acknowledgement during the pandemic was the entire country was able to see the downside of this food system that we have. That's, it's bifurcated into two. It either goes to anyway, I'm going to get into too many details, but it was a disaster. We saw farmers plowing under healthy fields of vegetables because they couldn't get them into the supply chain. We saw people lining up at food banks for hours and hours and hours because they were left out. And in a very basic way, no one should ever go hungry in a rich country. This just our whole way of dealing with it, the fights we have every single year over SNAP benefits and who's eligible to get food, what goes into our school lunches, who's eligible to eat them. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we shouldn't even be in this position. And we should have a much more sustainable food system. And I am grateful this administration has come in and really been thinking about the role agriculture can play in climate change. And as I said, agriculture is thought to create about 10% of the carbon issues that we have related to climate change, but also it could be one of our most serious partners. And the most important way to do that is to deal with soil health. And so this administration's got a big focus on it. They're looking for ways to fund it, for the possibility of agriculture to be part of a carbon bank, market-based solutions, but also conservation-based solutions. And we've really encouraged them to enhance the amount of funding that goes into conservation, and that provides for a lot of programs for farmers who might want to convert, whether it's to organic agriculture or more sustainable practices, cover crops, less tilling, things to keep the ground covered. There's just a whole long list of it. Also, in the bill that I wrote, the Agricultural Resilience Act, we have a lot on perennial agriculture, permanent pasture, raising animals on permanent grassland is a huge difference in how the environment is treated, how much carbon goes into the atmosphere because it's never tilled, and the quality, in my opinion, of grass-fed meat. So if we're going to raise meat, we ought to do it in a sustainable way, not in the feedlot way we do it now. But again, this administration, I think, is going to continue its emphasis. And we've already had multiple committee debates on this because apparently everybody doesn't agree that climate change is real. So I sit on the Agriculture Policy Committee and the Agriculture Appropriations Committee, and there's a pretty strong divide. But that said, there are some Republicans who know this is what the future has to be and will continue to work with. So for me, it's a lot of fresh air. It's none of it goes as far as I think we should go, as fast as we should go. But after 4 years in the wilderness, I'm just so pleased that we're starting to move ourselves in the right direction.
That's great. And I would also just say the Mills administration, I felt like we were 8 years like in the wilderness under Governor LePage and without any clean energy planning and just sort of haphazard. So it's really nice to have not only a strong partner with Governor Mills, but to also have the Biden administration and your partnership in Congress.
And I should throw that in, on top of everything else, the Climate Smart Plan, Amanda Beal is a great commissioner and has been thinking about these issues for a long time. And I think it's very dedicated to get the state in the position where Maine farmers can benefit from federal funds that will be available, and the state can do more supporting soil health, renewable energy on farms, better manure management, all kinds of things that are really critical.
And a participant also mentioned just renewable energy siting, so solar siting on agricultural land, ensuring that our agricultural land is protected, and solar siting is I don't know if you want to mention anything about that area, but that we don't imperil Maine's incredibly burgeoning farming industry with renewable energy siting.
Yeah, it's an important, it's an important trade-off. And, we want to increase the amount of solar energy available. Of course, it's easier to just site them on a nice flat piece of land. But if that also has great agricultural potential or is currently being used, we just we have to think about the policies regarding that. And it's not always going to be easy. There are some places where, there's some hybrid activities going on. You can have solar panels sited in a certain way and still graze sheep underneath them, or, there's some things you're able to do, but you don't want to lose all your farmland to that. But you also have to find a lot more places to site solar panels, or frankly, make it easier to have more distributive energy and make it so that everybody can have solar panels on their roof, because it's relatively easy. It's relatively easy, but it needs to be more affordable for people to have, individual ability to create power from their own home. So, and I think we're only going to get better with the technology around that. But back on the environmental justice issues, we have to make sure it's affordable to everybody and available to everybody. And I think we can easily do that. And that is frankly a much lower investment than some of the crazy things that people talk about or are willing to invest in, like, giant machines that will take all the carbon out of the atmosphere and bury them into the ground. And, we may end up having to use some of the high technology solutions, but there are many natural-based solutions, and also, ones that can be done in communities or on homes or other things that we should invest in. And also it makes the quality of life better for those people who never have to pay a utility bill again.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to ask one question that I know someone got in super early, and then that'll be it. We have so many questions left. So maybe you can also talk about how folks can follow up with your office. But this one is not environmentally related. It said, I read in the AARP bulletin that some hospitals throughout the US have special capability to deal with the elderly. Checking on the web, I learned that none of them is in Maine. Will you please advocate for this? So I'm not sure if you have a response about how this person can get their needs met.
It's a great question. I'll have to go to the AARP website because I'm not exactly sure what they were referring to. But again, since we're the oldest state in the nation, and we have to put a high priority on how we care for our seniors and how we care for Mainers in general, that seems like a really good question. And I have no idea why Maine isn't included or what that means, but we'll look into it, and happy to find out the answer for that. And do you want me to talk about how to communicate with us?
That'd be great, because there are so many questions that came in that we weren't able to ask you today.
Great. Well, I think that Rhiannon Hampson, who's on this call, has put her email into the chat. So get that down, get the spelling of her name. And that's one way to communicate. You can call our office anytime. We'll take your call. We'll direct you to somebody who can help answer the question, or get you to me if you want my opinion on something, or get you the information. Our website, as you mentioned, we do a newsletter. We have a website. We try to keep updated certain sections of our website that deal with climate change, some of the bills that are coming up in Congress, not only the ones I'm sponsoring, but we try to update them as the new session starts. So that's a good place to look for a lot more information. If you see something there you want to know more about, you can email us. All the contact information is there. And also, feel free to contact me at any time. My email is chellie@pingree.com. You just have to know how to spell my name and it'll get to me. And sometimes I'll have to send you to somebody else to get in-depth information, but I'm happy to hear from you, and just really appreciate. Sorry, we can't answer every question today. And just happy to talk to you anytime, and just really appreciate everyone's care and concern about the environment, and knowing the importance of the work we have ahead of us.
Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman Pingree. We are so grateful for your service to the people of Maine, your leadership on voting rights, on ocean climate action, environmental protection, agriculture, and your 100% LCV score last year. We are so glad that you were able to join us today. And thank you to everybody on this call for joining and for offering such thoughtful questions. We hope to see you all next week for a closer look at community resilience and climate change. Communities leading the way on building climate resilience are an important part of Maine's effort to fight climate change. Brian Ambrette, Senior Climate Resilience Coordinator in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, will join us to discuss the state's new community resilience pilot project and the governor's recent proposals for supporting and funding local climate action. Till then, thank you all. Have a beautiful weekend. And thanks again to Congresswoman Pingree. Bye-bye, everyone.